The mountain air carried the crisp bite of late autumn when Margaret Lawson first rolled her silver Lexus up my gravel drive, tires crunching like bones underfoot. I was 61, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the sun paint the ridge gold from the deck of the cedar cabin I'd built with my own hands after the divorce. 3 years of peace, 3 years without a single violation notice, 3 years of painting my door whatever damn color I pleased. Then came Margaret, 57, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, waving a manila folder thick enough to choke a mule and claiming I owed $48,000 to the Ridgeview Heights Homeowners Association for noncompliance with community aesthetic standards. I'd bought these 5 acres of unincorporated paradise outside Boulder specifically to escape HOAs forever. The county clerk had laughed when I asked about associations. Son, you're so far outside city limits the mailman needs GPS. Yet here stood Margaret on my land, heels sinking into dirt my grandfather had worked before Colorado was even a state, telling me my wildflower garden violated setback requirements and my red barn door constituted visual pollution. 3 years earlier, I'd sat in Patricia Evans's law office while she divided what remained of my life into 2 piles. The divorce papers were mercifully thin. The Maplewood Estates HOA violations were a telephone book of misery. My ex-wife Laura hadn't left because the love died. She'd left because living under Victoria Reynolds's reign had turned our home into a prison measured in inches. Victoria had ruled with a clipboard and a smile sharp as barbed wire. She'd cited us for grass that grew to 2¼ inches instead of 2. She'd measured the spacing between our tulips with a ruler. When I installed a motion sensor light after 3 break-ins in a month, Victoria materialized like a curse, writing a $600 fine before I'd even tested the bulb. Tom Harrington, my neighbor and real estate attorney, had tried to help. Victoria's days are numbered, he promised over backyard beers, both of us speaking in whispers like conspirators. Half the board wants her gone, but she knows the covenants better than Moses knew the tablets. His promises evaporated like morning mist. The violations intensified until Laura packed her bags, saying she couldn't live where checking the mailbox felt like waiting for biopsy results. Patricia Evans listened to my story with the weary compassion of someone who'd heard it 100 times. When I finished, she leaned back and delivered the prescription that saved my soul. Buy raw land, Daniel. Unincorporated. No covenants, no committees, no one telling you what color your soul can be. She knew about a 5-acre parcel on Ridgeview Peak, bordering Maplewood but legally untouchable. I'd closed on it within weeks, spent 18 months building my cedar sanctuary, and for 3 glorious years lived in actual freedom. I painted the cabin door fire engine red just because no one could stop me. My wildflower garden grew in glorious, rule-breaking chaos. I worked from my deck, consulting for marketing clients from Seattle to Singapore, answering to no one but the weather and my own conscience. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the ridge. I'd wave at old man Jenkins when he drove his ancient Ford to check his cattle, and that was the extent of my social obligations. Until Margaret Lawson decided my independence threatened property values. She arrived first with calculated warmth, carrying Starbucks and a story about her own bitter divorce. The new HOA leadership wanted reform, she explained, offering voluntary participation in services that would benefit everyone. Snow plowing that could handle the 4-foot drifts that buried my access road every February. Bulk trash pickup that saved me weekly trips to the county dump. Utility coordination for the power lines that ran through association property to reach my cabin. The agreement was 3 pages of plain English, 30-day cancellation, fees that actually cost less than my current private contracts. I'd learned to be suspicious, but Margaret's pitch was flawless. She understood the appeal of mountain isolation. She'd been through the divorce grinder herself. The old regime under Victoria Reynolds had been about control, she acknowledged. The new board wanted cooperation. I signed, partly for convenience, mostly because the numbers made sense and Margaret seemed to genuinely understand why someone would choose 5 acres of wilderness over manicured conformity. The request started small enough to seem reasonable. Could I park my Silverado behind the cabin instead of in the circular drive? The reflection off the chrome disrupted evening stargazing for downhill neighbors. Would I consider lower wattage bulbs in my deck lights? The wildflower garden was beautiful, but perhaps a bit unstructured. Some pathway stones would give it definition while maintaining the natural aesthetic. Each suggestion came wrapped in apology and practical explanation. I made the changes. The lighting actually improved my evening reading on the deck. The stones gave my garden an intentional look I hadn't realized I wanted. What I failed to notice was the pattern. Every adjustment moved my property incrementally closer to Maplewood's sterile perfection. The random, organic choices I'd made over 3 years of mountain living were being systematically refined into something more orderly, more controlled, more similar to the beige prison I'd fled. Then came the surveyors. They arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 men in fluorescent vests with tripods and measuring wheels. Professional, polite, and thoroughly uninformative when I asked their purpose. Just updating boundary markers after winter frost heave, one explained, showing work orders with official county seals. Routine maintenance. But when I walked the new pins that afternoon, my stomach dropped. The markers had shifted inward 10 feet on the eastern boundary, claiming my deck, half my garden, and the solar array that powered my off-grid office. I called the county surveyor's office immediately. The clerk was helpful, but unconcerned. Boundary disputes happened frequently in unincorporated areas. She suggested a formal resurvey through my insurance, 6 to 8 weeks, $1,500. That evening, standing on my rapidly shrinking deck, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The new survey pins created perfect 90-degree angles, exactly the kind of precision that HOA covenants required for property line maintenance. I pulled out Margaret's voluntary agreement and read it with the desperate attention of a man watching his life savings disappear. Page 2, subsection C, buried in bland legal language. Property owner acknowledges that boundary verification may be required to ensure accurate service provision and agrees to cooperate with professional surveying as needed for utility easement maintenance. The bureaucratic assault began within days. County code enforcement officers appeared for routine inspections that felt anything but routine. My septic system needed compliance testing. My electrical service required updated permits for the solar panels I'd installed 2 years earlier. The well water needed bacterial analysis that hadn't been required when I purchased the property. Each inspection carried fees, deadlines, and the implicit threat of larger penalties. The timing was surgical. All inspections triggered within the same 10-day window, creating an administrative nightmare that consumed my work time and drained my bank account. The officials were polite but inflexible, citing regulations that seemed to have materialized specifically for properties like mine. I called Tom Harrington for advice, explaining the sudden onslaught of county requirements. His legal expertise was exactly what I needed, someone who understood both HOA law and county regulations. They can't force annexation, he assured me, but they can make independence expensive. He offered to draft a property independence declaration that would explicitly reject HOA expansion and establish my legal right to remain outside their jurisdiction. His fee was reasonable, especially considering the alternative. While Tom worked on the legal documentation, I investigated the scope of Margaret's campaign. The pattern was chilling. All 12 property owners who'd received expansion meeting invitations had experienced similar code enforcement visits. The violations were remarkably consistent: septic inspections, electrical permits, water testing, suggesting coordination between the HOA and county officials. 3 owners had already contacted Margaret about voluntary compliance, deciding that paying her fees was preferable to fighting escalating costs. 2 others had listed their properties for sale. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Create enough administrative pressure that surrender became the rational choice. Tom delivered my independence declaration with the warm smile I'd grown accustomed to over backyard conversations. The document was comprehensive, explicitly rejecting HOA expansion and asserting my property rights under county regulations. But as he explained the legal implications, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The declaration referenced binding arbitration procedures for any future disputes related to property boundaries or service provision. When I questioned the clause, Tom's explanation was technically correct, but felt rehearsed. Arbitration is faster and cheaper than court, he said, avoiding eye contact. If Margaret challenges your status, this protects your interests. What he didn't mention was that arbitration typically favored parties with greater resources. What he also didn't mention was that binding arbitration could limit my appeal rights. I signed anyway, needing protection against Margaret's campaign. The filing fee was $200, and Tom waived his preparation costs as a neighbor discount that should have felt generous but instead triggered new suspicions. That evening, certified mail delivered the blow that made everything clear. My property taxes had increased 300% based on updated service area classifications. My land was now part of an enhanced municipal service zone that justified significantly higher assessments. The timing wasn't coincidence. The reassessment had been triggered by my inclusion in Margaret's expanded service area, regardless of actual participation. I sat on my deck with a beer and my laptop, researching arbitration law. The forums were filled with stories of people who'd learned too late that arbitration clauses made lawsuits nearly impossible. My situation was challenging because I'd signed as an informed adult. But as I dug deeper, I found hope. Tom's mediation company was new, lacking a track record of fair dealing. If I could prove structural bias, I might challenge the arbitration requirement. I called Patricia Evans and explained everything. Her analysis was optimistic. Binding arbitration can be challenged for unconscionability if there's conflict of interest. If Tom established his company to handle disputes he was creating, that voids the clause. She agreed to review my case, but warned that proving coordination would be difficult. I tested the system by filing a formal challenge to the tax reassessment. If Ridgeview mediation was neutral, my complaint would receive fair consideration. 2 days later, the response confirmed my worst fears. The arbitrator, a former partner of Tom's, determined the reassessment was appropriate given my voluntary participation in community services. The system wasn't biased. It was a closed loop designed to validate Margaret's campaign regardless of merits. But they'd made a crucial mistake. By creating such obvious bias, they'd given me evidence to challenge the entire framework. Sleep became impossible. I spent nights researching environmental law, finding the regulation that became my salvation. Federal guidelines required community impact studies for any zoning change affecting individual properties. Margaret's enhanced service zone had never undergone proper review. The county accepted her environmental claims without verification. I challenged the assessment in federal court, documenting manipulated data about septic failures that never occurred, water usage projections that contradicted records, erosion patterns that existed only in doctored photographs. The federal assessor invalidated the zone designation. Margaret's expansion collapsed. I won $25,000 in compensation. The victory lasted 6 days. The deepfake video appeared on community forums, spreading with viral velocity. It showed me threatening Margaret outside her home, voice raised, face twisted with rage. The footage was seamless. I'd never been to her house. The video destroyed my reputation overnight. Clients fled. My name became synonymous with property extremism. Margaret's response was perfect victimhood. Tearful videos about the single mother terrorized by my threats. CNN picked up the story. Federal agents appeared with cyber harassment warrants. My documentation saved me, timestamped logs proving I was home when the threats allegedly occurred. The FBI confirmed fabrication, but the damage was permanent. 15 pounds melted from my frame. Panic attack struck without warning. I considered selling at a loss to escape the nightmare. The breakthrough came while cleaning files for a potential move. I found the security recorder installed 2 years earlier, capturing Margaret's phone call from my deck. Phase 3 complete. Her voice said, stripped of warmth. Target isolated, financially vulnerable. Deepfake exceeded projections. Reputation destroyed, business finished. Asset seizure proceeds once taxed default forces sale. The conversation revealed everything. Margaret Lawson was Victoria Reynolds, operating under false identity after faking her death. The car accident, estate sale, insurance payout, all orchestrated to fund a criminal enterprise targeting rural property owners across 4 states. 47 files documented psychological profiles, harassment strategies tailored to break each victim. Voice analysis confirmed the match. Digital forensics traced her financial flows from Victoria's insurance settlement through shell companies to Margaret's operations. The FBI moved within days, raiding her home, Tom's office, the mediation company. They found the manual, 70 pages of criminal methodology, flowcharts measuring harassment effectiveness. Victoria faced 14 federal counts. Tom cooperated for reduced sentencing. The HOA settled civil claims for $180,000 plus $2,000 monthly for 10 years in boundary consulting fees. My marketing business recovered, specializing in property rights defense. The fund I established helped 23 families resist similar schemes. Every month, Maplewood Estates sends a check that reminds them targeting the wrong person costs dearly. The cabin stands painted brilliant blue, wildflowers blooming in defiant chaos. The mountains keep their promises. Freedom isn't free, but sometimes justice pays the bill with interest. What about you? Ever face someone who tried to steal your peace with paperwork and lies? Did you fight with evidence and patience, or wish you documented every moment? Share your story below, especially about standing against injustice that wears a smile. Where do you draw the line between community and control, between rules and robbery? The Ridge is listening.